Can I invite Carly to present her?
Okay, is this good or should I use the other mic? No, I think we're good. Okay, so thank you for all coming. I'm really excited to start off this session. I'm going to be presenting on my dissertation research, or a small slice of it. So I'm going to jump right in. For close to 14 months across 2016 and 17, I traversed remote rain-filled rice belts like this one in the eastern district of Madhya Pradesh and a northern district of Jharkhand, visiting self-help groups led by women, or SHGs. I was accompanied by NGO workers and community village workers as part of a pilot project that was looking to make agriculture nutrition sensitive. So this large, established livelihoods NGO was attempting to retrofit its existing model, which focused on enhancing income through improving the productivity of rice and other staple crops and cash cropping, to include things such as promoting millets, coarse grains, pulses or dal for protein, as well as kitchen gardens to improve vegetable consumption. My research was looking at this particular program, and it asked, how does a particular NSA program work in practice, in day-to-day actual practice, and how are people responding to it with their decision-making processes and what to grow and eat? So the methods I used for this, I apologize, the slide's not coming right. The methods I used for this were ethnographic and qualitative. So I stayed in the village for long periods of the time I was there, as well as with the NGO workers in their home. In addition to participating in just everyday village life, I also attended a number of nutrition meetings, trainings, and village-level nutrition education modules. In addition to participant observation, I did quite a few interviews. So I interviewed women farmers in Madhya Pradesh and Jharkhand, as well as NGO workers and associated government stakeholders. So throughout 2017 pre-monsoon agricultural season, I witnessed agricultural workers or village community workers like this one out in full force, trying to make women farmers understand the importance of growing nutrition-sensitive crops. Women farmers were always very excited by this information. They would readily agree with them that it would be better for them to grow these crops than to buy them from the market where they were expensive and they felt lesser quality. However, despite all of this enthusiasm in this May-June planning period, I saw and observed an interesting thing happen, which was as soon as the monsoon rain started in late June, early July, all of this buzz dissipated as women became overwhelmed with something that they had been trained to do the last 15 years, which is transplant paddy. Thus, this research showed me it's important to understand these NSA programs in the context of communities who have been impacted by agricultural development programs that are trying to promote Green Revolution type technologies. So the Green Revolution, I'm sure all of us are very familiar with, but it's dramatically reduced hunger in South Asia through increasing rice and wheat production through a suite of technologies. However, it has not solved the problem of malnutrition, and it has also caused some second-order problems, such as environmental degradation, increased inequality in rural areas, and decreased production diversity. As such, this paradigm of NSA has really come to force in the last 10 years to rectify these cereal-centric agricultural systems. There's also been this huge body of literature that many of us are probably familiar with, and they have done a brilliant job of looking at gender and gender equity and arguing that gender is an important concept of nutrition-sensitive agriculture. However, within the NSA literature, there's been less of a focus on equity in a more conceptualized way, looking at other axes of difference, such as education, caste, class, and things like language. It's also not been conceptualized in ways that other fields have done a great job of doing, particularly payment for ecosystem services and climate change adaptation have done a brilliant job of really pulling equity into their frameworks. So from these literatures, payment for ecosystem services and climate adaptation, I draw a Rawlsian equity framework. Now this has equity parceled into 3 different domains. The first is distributive, which looks at the sharing of benefits and costs, who is targeted, and is the program based on efficiency or the needs of the most marginalized. So I think it's good to really quickly point out the difference between equity and equality because they're often confused. So equity is giving everyone the same opportunity to be successful, and equality means treating everyone the same. So equity thus implies differential treatment, recognizing there are many people who are historically marginalized and oppressed and will require more support to have the same opportunity for success. So procedural equity is another important domain, and it looks at the participation and representation within decision-making processes and development agendas, and this does include giving a positive bias to the most marginalized, such as people who do not speak the non-dominant language. Finally, recognition, which draws heavily from feminist theory, and this looks at placing different value systems, belief systems, knowledge systems on equal footing rather than in a hierarchy with each other and putting them in dialogue. So it's understanding knowledge is partial and situated and that everybody has valuable information to bring to the picture. So taking this framework and looking at this program, I see that the NSA things that were being promoted were not particularly effective due to the paddy constraints, nor were they entirely equitable. But my main argument in this paper is that if the program were to have a strong equity focus, I believe it could be more effective. So this is based on 3 key observations. The first was this observation that the main barrier to nutrition-sensitive agriculture is the labor demands of transplanting improved paddy. The second thing is that these paddy promotion programs have not been received equitably. So most of the most marginalized people with poor land holdings, little grasp of Hindi, or little education were not transplanting paddy. They were doing their traditional practice of broadcasting. Thus, they seemed to be a great position to lead a nutrition-sensitive agriculture revolution since they were already practicing a more diversified form of agriculture. However, the key barrier was that there was very low project participation from the most marginalized households who felt that these programs were dominated by people who were fluent in Hindi, more entrepreneurial, and better able to navigate markets and government programs. So I'm going to fly through this main barriers to nutrition-sensitive agriculture is paddy, and hopefully talk more about it in the Q&A, but I really want to get to the equity part. So I go through the 3 crops in the paper of millets and dal and vegetable gardens, and across all 3, it really is this time constraint of that agriculture is a very time-sensitive process, and it's all happening in this very short amount of time, and transplanting is just time-consuming and labor-intensive, and so people don't want to tend to a kitchen garden when they come back from transplanting paddy all day. And so I found this to be a really big barrier to successful, robust kitchen gardens being taken up. And happy to talk more in Q&A. However, people that were just broadcasting, they oftentimes did not have this type of labor demand placed upon them. However, most of these people, as I said, had low project participation. When I engaged these women who were not participating actively, many of them felt that the NGO mostly just did improved paddy production, and they didn't have the right kind of land for that, and so they did not want to participate. Another woman told me, we don't know the rules of this group, meaning there's a whole process of norming and forming the group, and they're not attuned to it. Many people also had savings and lending problems and couldn't contribute 10 rupees per week. Another woman told me, too much ego. There's too much talking, and I don't feel like I can compete. Another reason was that people really liked the indigenous rice and they didn't really want to change that practice. And so this is another thing that I'm excited to talk about more in Q&A. The marginalized were not actively engaged, and this was something NGO workers were well aware of. NGO workers were largely reliant on existing social relations to implement the projects, as were the community nutrition mentors. And this usually meant people who spoke Hindi to a relatively well degree, or whatever the dominant language was. There was a pressure to meet quantitative targets by everyone, and so this limited the amount of time people were able to speak to the women. And I'm out of time, so I'm gonna go quickly. I spoke to one NGO woman, and she told me that she knew that this was happening, and that there's a triangle of participation, and that they only see a certain number of women come every time, but that it will require time to engage with people who are not speaking the dominant language or have less education, and that they just simply did not have the human resource capacity to make that time. No time. And so in conclusion, I want to say that I think we can imagine nutrition-sensitive agriculture different and really formulate projects that have this strong equity conceptualization that starts from recognitional and goes through procedural and distributive, and just acknowledge people where they're at rather than pushing something on them. So thank you so much for your time.